Welcome to Hungary, a member of the European Union for 2 decades, who is often referred to as the black sheep of the European Union family. But why do people think this? Well, under Prime Minister Viktor Orban's leadership, Hungary has faced criticisms for its handling of judiciary independence, media landscape, and allegations of discrimination. These concerns have led to such significant democratic backsliding that a study by the NGO Freedom House concluded that since 2010, Hungary has witnessed such a democratic decline that it can no longer be called a democracy today. The European Union has taken action by freezing over 30 billion euros in EU funds designated for Hungary and presenting a list of essential reforms that must be implemented before the funds are released. Naturally, this has provoked a strong reaction from Orban, who has set out to obstruct EU initiatives whenever possible. For instance, one of the European Commission's key proposals involves around allocating 50 billion euros to Ukraine and commencing EU membership negotiations with Ukraine in December. However, this hinges on unanimous agreement among all 27 member states, requiring the approval of each. Hungary, on the other hand, has already signaled its intent to potentially veto this decision, a move that some perceive as a form of leverage, or in other words, blackmail, to unfreeze the EU funds. This standoff has already happened before. In December last year, Hungary used its veto power to block aid and arms to Ukraine, as well as a minimum corporation tax of 15% for companies across the EU. However, once the EU unfroze a portion of the funds designated for Hungary, the country withdrew its veto. This game of cat and mouse is counterproductive and cripples the EU's ability to respond to international crises quickly. So what can the EU do in response? Well, the EU has a potential solution in its toolkit, called Article 7, often referred to as the nuclear option. This measure involves suspending a member state's voting rights within the EU, effectively limiting its ability to influence EU decisions. This would mean that Hungary could no longer obstruct key EU legislation. So how does this work? The process begins with the European Council, where the heads of state from EU member countries must collectively assess and reach a consensus regarding whether a member state is persistently breaching EU values, such as democracy and the rule of law. Once unanimous agreement among the European Council members is achieved, Article 7 can be initiated. Subsequently, the matter proceeds to the European Parliament, where a confirmation of the breach requires a 4/5 majority vote. Once the European Parliament confirms the breach, Article 7 can be invoked, resulting in the suspension of the member states' voting rights within EU institutions. This process underscores the EU's commitment to upholding its fundamental values and principles. The European Parliament even voted in overwhelming favor to start this process back in 2018 and in 2022. So why has this not already happened with Hungary? Well, Hungary has a key partner in crime, Poland. Under the governance of Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, there has been a consistent alignment with Hungary in defending one another on the EU level. Both countries, often sharing similar views on issues related to national sovereignty and EU values, have worked together to resist potential sanctions and measures stemming from concerns about democratic backsliding within the EU. In practice, this means that any attempt to trigger Article 7 for Hungary will just be blocked by Poland's veto. But things have changed. The election held in Poland on October the 15th marked a significant setback for the Law and Justice Party, which secured only 194 seats. And their potential coalition partner scored a mere 18 seats. In response, the main opposition, Civic Coalition, led by former Prime Minister and ex-European Council President Donald Tusk, along with the Third Way and the Left, have joined forces to form a coalition government to remove PIS from office. Collectively, they hold 248 seats, granting them the majority required to rule and shape Poland's future. This marks a remarkable victory for politician Donald Tusk, as his leadership and strong EU profile is great news for the EU, as his government is poised to uphold EU principles concerning democracy and the rule of law. So what about Hungary? It goes without saying that this is bad news for Orban. Without Poland's support, Hungary runs a serious risk of losing their voting rights within the European Union. Or do they? Enter Slovakia. Following the recent Slovakian elections on September the 30th, Fico, the leader of SMER, a social democratic and left-wing populist party, secured victory. His election campaign included pledges to halt military aid to Ukraine and criticism of sanctions on Russia. Fico's leadership may stir Slovakia closer to Hungary, distancing itself from the unified stance on supporting Ukraine that the EU and Western nations have aimed to uphold. Furthermore, Slovakia might fill the void that Poland has left behind and become Hungary's new partner in crime when it comes to defending one another when facing Article 7. Here's what we think. The fundamental question is whether the EU should even attempt to trigger Article 7 against Hungary in the first place. It's a complex dilemma. Orban could exploit his inability to vote in the EU as ammunition to further criticize the organization, especially given his control over the media in Hungary. This could potentially shift Hungary from being one of the most pro-EU countries to a Eurosceptic one. On the flip side, waiting until the Hungarian elections in 2026 carries a risk of significant damage, as the EU might encounter obstructions at every turn. Not to mention, Orban might actually win again. From our viewpoint, it's becoming increasingly evident that a multi-tier Europe might offer the most viable solution. In this scenario, some countries would engage in deeper integration, while others take a more restrained approach. This would imply that Hungary remains an important EU member, but must undergo reforms before ascending to a more integrated EU tier. For a more comprehensive explanation, subscribe to watch our upcoming video on this concept, or refer to an earlier video on the screen for a preliminary understanding of this approach. But please bear in mind that this is one of our older videos with older animation. But please also let us know in the comments what you think the EU should do. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please consider signing up to Patreon.